Welcome to Gardening with the Masters, presented by Sandoval Extension Master Gardeners. Today we welcome Sandy Liakus, and she will be discussing tree and shrub protective maintenance in preparation of the drought. Sandy became a Master Gardener in 2008 and has contributed much to the Sandoval Extension Master Gardener program. She initiated both the New Beginnings Therapy Garden in Bernalillo and the Placitas Elementary After School Garden Club. She is the project chair for our home visit program. Sandy is also the chair of the Placitas Garden Tour and has been a member of the Jardineros de Placitas since 2007. So if you are an SEMG member, a Master Gardener member, these may be things that you already know about Sandy, but here are some things that you may not know. Sandy is a retired chemist and mechanical engineer. She's active in local music outreach organizations, including the New Mexico Jazz Workshop and the Canyon Blues and Jazz. Sandy grew up on a farm in Nebraska and worked in the family garden. She's always enjoyed landscaping and tending her outdoor home spaces and has always loved trees in both urban and rural forest settings. And now, here is Sandy Liakus with tree and shrub protective maintenance and preparation of the drought.
Next. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Paget. In this presentation, just as a summary, I will go over these points. First of all, I want to just summarize the exceptional drought conditions that are current in New Mexico. But trees and shrubs still provide a benefit for us during drought and our changing climate. And they help us achieve a sustainable future for people and nature. We do need to increase and diversify trees in Albuquerque and the greater Albuquerque urban area and in New Mexico. We have a declining tree canopy issue. I want to talk about climate-ready trees for Albuquerque. It's a new report that came out in December. I will discuss proper tree and shrub planting, correct watering of trees and shrubs that will help us in drought, pest management in drought, and then pruning and other care as we're approaching our summer season in drought. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the April 13th, 2021 Drought Monitor Map for New Mexico. It shows some pretty severe conditions. We all know we were in a very dry state from January up until Wednesday, and hopefully most of you had some measurable rainfall during that time. But that will not be enough to get us out of drought. We'll need several more rainfalls like that to get us out of drought, because we've been in drought for some time. Almost 100% of all counties in New Mexico are in severe drought or more. And so that includes the orange, the light orange, the reddish orange, and the brownish orange areas of the state. And even in Sandoval County, for those that know Sandoval County, it's in the upper, kind of mid central to upper part of the state. Over a third is in exceptional drought right now, and the rest in extreme or severe drought. Just 1 year ago, only 11% of the 12% of the state counties were in that. So the severe conditions started last fall. Next, please. Okay, a severe drought, what does that correspond to? I mean, all these, whether it's severe, extreme, or exceptional drought, we're in a high fire risk right now. Crop and pasture losses are likely, and already we're going into that early spring where it's very critical for crops, planting, and pasture growth. We'll have widespread water shortages can be expected with restrictions. That's an extreme drought. And then with exceptional drought, those water shortages are likely to lead to water emergencies. Next, please. This is from the U.S. Drought Monitor website, and it shows the history of drought in New Mexico, and particularly from 2000 to the present. That's almost 2 decades. And we've been in a severe extended drought periods almost every decade. At the start of the 2000s, you can see an extended period corresponding to 2002 to 2005 with the darker orange colorations. That was an extended drought. And for those that have recently resided in New Mexico, I think we all remember the extended drought that started in the summer of 2011 and really extended to 2015, which was quite severe, and we lost a lot of trees and shrubs during that time and had severe fires. Now, almost a decade later, we are in another drought period, and you could see at the start of 2011, the severe drought, the exceptional drought coloration, the brown, is higher than it has been in the last 2 decades. Next, please. This is a result of, I live in Placitas, so we can still see signs of that 2011, 2015 drought when we lost a lot of our most drought resistant native shrubs, the one seed juniper, or some people refer to it as a tree, and it suffered severe dieback, particularly on the western slopes of Placitas. And you can see the crispy or dried branches, in the foreground relative to the healthy junipers that are closer to the home. Next. We live in here in New Mexico. We have an arid, high desert climate. In our greater Albuquerque area falls into zones, USDA growing zones 7A and 7B subzones. And that includes cities like Albuquerque, Corrales, townships like Placitas, cities of Rio Rancho and Los Lunas. So 7A has a minimum average temperature of 0 to 5 degrees. The 7B, it's a little bit of a warmer zone, mostly in urban Albuquerque and the valley, 5 to 10 degrees. And then we have microclimates that extend to the warmer 8B subzone, minimum average temperature. And then we have colder subzones, in the higher elevations of the urban area, 6B. And we just get an average rainfall of 11 to 13 inches of rain, and that excludes snow. Next. So you might be thinking, why even plant trees and shrubs in this changing climate and during the imminent drought that we're going into this summer? Well, if you have selected the right plant for the right place, you're most likely fine. If you are still selecting trees and shrubs for planting, be sure to select that right plant for the right place. That is so important. And then we have to be responsible. You only want to plant what you can effectively manage and afford. You need to follow neighborhood restrictions, so be aware of what you're restricted to, and then just accept that there will be water restrictions going forward. And then plant and water wisely. So you need to be aware of your plant, that it fits into the growing zone. If it is borderline, planted in your microclimate, an appropriate microclimate, provide shade, and and be aware of your landscape locations, as far as shade, temperature variations, wind speeds. And then if you're doing it in a city location, um, there are special trees and planting requirements because you're going to get a lot more reflective heat. Um, and then plant when it's cooler. Like we're still relatively cool now, so you can still plant, but coming up about mid-May, it's going to start getting much hotter. And then by June, we're in the hottest and driest time, and it's not a good time to plant. So it'll be difficult for the roots to take hold before we get into extreme heat and even more dry conditions. And when you plant when it's cooler, you have less water evaporation, so you're not wasting the water you do use. And plant correctly for your slope and soil conditions, and then water, and know your trees, understand your tree species and age requirements for water. Next. And then, well, trees, provide great benefits for humans and for animals. And we all know, even in urban areas, we flock to parks. We like to park under trees in shopping center parking lots. And they just provide a lot of personal and health benefits, mental health benefits for humans. And then they provide a habitat for wildlife. And in addition to that, they cleanse air and water. Now, urban trees have been shown to reduce temperatures in summertime up to 14 degrees in cities and towns. This is called that heat island, and you get those increased temperatures in cities and town because of the heat island effect. And that's that reflective heat that you get from tall buildings, a lot of concrete pavement. So the slide shows you the differences in temperatures on a hot day. It could be anywhere, like a 10-degree difference between rural and city temperatures. Next. Now here's a map of Albuquerque, and this came out pretty recently from a study done at Portland State University in conjunction with CAPA strategies. And they chose different cities and they recorded summer afternoon temperatures, and they mapped them out. And on this map, this is a map of Albuquerque. On the right, you have your far east Albuquerque, Northeast Heights. And then as you go west, you can see the Rio Grande River in the far west is on the left. And then the two major highways, I-25, a north-south arterial, and the Interstate 40, the east to west arterial, and then the intersection at the Big I. Now, Albuquerque is unique from other cities in the fact that we have an elevation effect. So the further east you are, we are at a higher elevation and closer to in the foothills of the Sandia Mountain. So that helps moderate temperatures. So those are cooler. They're going to be, it could be anywhere from 10 to 20 degrees cooler in those elevated areas. Now, as you go west, you expect to get warmer temperatures, and you see concentrations of orange just to the northeast of the Big I, and there's a lot of urban activity going on there, a lot of businesses, warehouses, traffic. And then to the southeast of the Big I intersection, you see a concentrated orange area, and that is the downtown Albuquerque. And as you see, you do see that hotter temperatures. So that's the heat island effect. And as you go west, and that's actually, those areas are actually warmer than some of the far west areas of Albuquerque, west of the river. And in fact, there are some cooler areas in the west area, and those probably correspond to golf courses, parks, and in established urban areas where you do have more trees. Next. Every spring, we all get excited when the trees start budding and leafing out and you get blooms. And it's so, inspiring. And trees, it shows the resistance of trees that we have, that, they burst out in a lot of beautiful, showy glory. But we know a month from now, it's going to be different, particularly our trees that are along the roadsides where they don't have the benefit of shade or irrigation. But trees and shrubs are very resilient, but we do need to encourage to help them along, plant them correctly, water them correctly, and select the right tree and shrub for the right place. Next. And that leads me to cover this Climateready Trees report that came out in in December of 2020. And it is on the reference list, and you can read more about it. But it was the culmination of a research project that was done by the Nature Conservancy, or local Nature Conservancy organization. And it was done in order to achieve a sustainable, for future for people and nature through the proper planting of trees. So climate mitigation can be expedited by trees. And already trees in our local urban forests and on our landscapes are working quietly to provide air and water pollution removal. They provide carbon storage, heat mitigation, they reduce stormwater runoff, and improve the health and well-being of people. However, we need to do some work in our area to adapt to the changing climate and increasing temperatures. The canopy of existing trees in the greater Albuquerque area is rapidly declining due to age, limited protections, and lack of proper tree care. And then we have the heat island effect in our urban areas. Next. This report covered temperatures through the decades, changing temperatures through the decades, and projections by climatologists. And these quotes are kind of interesting, and they say, over the next 30 years, high temperatures in Albuquerque will resemble current temperatures in Las Cruces and El Paso. And Las Cruces and El Paso, are located in the southern part of the state on the border. And El Paso's technically in Texas. And then more frightening, in 80 years, temperatures in Albuquerque will be closer to highs currently experienced in Tucson, Arizona. So we have to be prepared for this. I mean, we already have beautiful trees, existing trees and shrubs that we want to protect that are climate appropriate. But when we select new plants, we should be cognizant of the changing climate and temperatures, and look at plants that will extend to warmer climate zones, but still be viable in our cold winters. Next. This is, the report definitely wants to encourage diversity, increasing the diversity of trees in the Albuquerque urban forest and beyond. This photo is of Sarah Hurtau. She's a program director of the research and efforts in current efforts to promote proper tree planting in Albuquerque. And that's part of the Urban Conservation Program, which is the New Mexico chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And the research that was completed leading to the report showed that the largest shade tree in Albuquerque is the Siberian elm tree, accounting for 25% of the city's shade cover. And most of those trees were planted decades ago. And the last major tree planting campaign in Albuquerque was a century ago. Next. 60% of other Albuquerque area shade trees are younger and smaller diameter trees of 6 inches or less, which offer limited shade. And the current canopy cover is facing a crisis because some of the trees are about to die. So, and they're aging. So in the next decade or two, we'll see, with climate changing events and drought, we'll see more sun scald, new pest damage, increased drought stress, and old tree issues and disease. Next. There's been a lack of government policies and community efforts to mitigate this. And Albuquerque and surrounding communities are, like I said before, are facing the tree shade crisis because of the lack of community and government policies and the tree canopy age. Next. So the Nature Conservancy project aims to provide a resource for a selection of climate-ready tree and site plantings. They aim to highlight a variety of trees available to diversify the urban forest. And they want to encourage local nurseries to start planting for stock to meet this change. And more importantly, they want to inspire people to plant trees, climate-ready trees, and participate in the Nature Conservancy project and other urban tree projects. And those could include the Tree Stewards Organization and Tree New Mexico. And then to continue to foster community stewardship of trees and awareness of planting the right tree in the right place. Next. So this Climate Ready Trees came out with a guidelines, which you can find online. And these guidelines are divided up into 7 different urban settings. And those are stormwater infrastructure, or like green stormwater, that's GSI, types 1 and 2, xeriscape and public recreation, residential and commercial. Most of our residential will fall into this xeriscaped category, which has low to medium irrigation. Highly irrigated areas like parks and golf courses, streetscapes with limited soil, restricted growing areas, and climate-ready fruit trees. Next. So anyway, I will go through an example, but Dr. Marissa Thompson, she's our NMSU Extension Tree Specialist, says that this guide, this Climate Ready Tree Guide, is useful for not just Albuquerque and the greater Albuquerque area. It's used, the concepts can be used for New Mexico and other southwestern states. So, and those can include cities like Farmington, Raton, Lordsburg, Carlsbad, and Clovis. So you just, pay attention to your current USDA growing zone, but try to look for trees that can be more heat hardy within your cold hardy zone. So, and Marissa recommends that, so for, in addition to checking on USDA cold hardiness, you check on heat hardiness by researching trees that already grow in Las Cruces or Tucson. And, if you go online, see what their recommended tree lists are. Judith Phillips has books for plants that are appropriate for the entire Southwest. So just select trees and shrubs that can live in our colder New Mexico, central New Mexico climate, but yet that span that heat subzone. So that will help us assure sustainability of our plants in the coming decades. Next. So I'm going to take review the xeriscaped location type 3 from the Climateready tree. And I'm going to select a couple examples. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is type 3 xeriscaped areas, part of that Climateready tree selection guide. And as you see, as far as xeriscaped or low to medium irrigation, and just look at the list and you'll see a lot of trees that you're already familiar with, that we already have in our landscapes, and even in some of our urban areas, like the redbuds, Mexican, Oklahoma redbud, Western redbud, netleaf hackberry, American smoke tree, New Mexico privet, fragrant ash, crepe myrtle, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that tree. Chinese pistache, which has become more popular in the last decade, and then mesquites. So you do see a lot of familiar trees on this list. So let's take crepe myrtles and mesquites. Next slide. So crepe myrtles, they are good up to, they are appropriate for a colder climates up to 7A. And any of you already know that they grow very well in the southern part of the state. Like if you drive through Las Cruces in June, you see beautifully blooming crepe myrtles everywhere. But they also do quite well in the Albuquerque residential area. They bloom a little bit later. And even for slightly colder subzones and placitas, as long as you plant them in protected courtyard areas, they can do well. And then the mesquite tree species, you don't see a whole lot of them around here, but they are mostly hardy in a wide range of USDA zones, 6 to 9. And they are commonly planted in Las Cruces and Tucson. So those are just two of the trees that are in that xeriscaped category. Next. The Santa Fe Botanical Garden in the last 5 years has planted a lot of blue Arizona cypress in favor of, the more traditional blue spruce species that were popular in the Santa Fe area, and they are recommending Santa Fe residents, if you want that blue coloration of conifer foliage in your landscapes, plant the Arizona blue star cypress. And there's different other Arizona cypress trees that are also appropriate. But that was because even Santa Fe, which is at a higher elevation, was experiencing unpredicted precipitation patterns and increasing temperatures at their elevation. So if you look at blue Arizona cypress, it's good up to 7,000 feet, but it covers a wide growing zone, 5B up to 11. So it has great heat tolerance, and the water needs are 10 to 12 inches. So they fall into our annual precipitation well. Compare that to, the Colorado blue spruce, which is more of a forest tree. It occurs naturally at 7 to 10,000 feet in Arizona and in New Mexico. It needs rich, moist soils, and its hardiness zone is limited to 7, and it really needs 20 inches of precipitation or equivalent per year. Next. So instead of ponderosa pine, which you do see a lot, that was planted in the last 20 years in Albuquerque residential areas or along street sides, its water needs are the 12 to 24, but it survives better at elevations of 9,000 feet. And here it is more resistant to, in our lower elevations, it's less resistant to disease and needs more water or organic soil to keep it growing well. So, but instead of that, plant, something in the juniper or cypress family, like the Rocky Mountain juniper has only requires 9 inches minimum water a year and has a wide USDA hardiness zone region from 4 to 9. Now, it can grow taller. It's going to grow slower, but it's 30 to 40 foot tall. But, consider some of those other heat and drought tolerant junipers that are in the Climateready tree list. Alligator junipers, 7 to 9. It needs a little more warmth. That's kind of borderline for our region. The 1-seed junipers, our native tree, 4 to 8. I mean, so it can tolerate heat up to 8, and some of the species might be getting more drought tolerant too due to evolution. Eastern red cedar, 2 to 9. So those are options that are more heat and drought tolerant compared to what we had become accustomed to in our area in 2 decades ago. Next. Another, like, and 2 other trees that became, that are prevalent, other conifer trees in our area are the Austrian pine and spruce varieties. And they are typically cover USDA hardiness zones of 4 to 8. Now, instead of that, you might want to, if you want a large, fluffy tree, consider an Afghan pine, which has a hardiness level of 6 to 10. It's moderate growth, actually moderate to fast growth, and it grows in the most hot, dry climates that we have. So, yeah. So that's another option, and that was on the list of the climate-ready trees for xeriscaped areas.
Sandy, we have a question.
Yes.
What are the annual water needs of alligator, 1-seed, and red cedar?
Well, since they are on that climate-ready trees, I can't specifically. They should be appropriate, like the water that we currently have in the Albuquerque area. Since they are on that list, I will have to get back, but I would be certain that they require about in the 12 inches. But they might need some, special site preparation, because I think some of those trees are more difficult to grow. And that Climate Ready Tree Project does talk about site preparations too.
Great, thanks. And I'll remind everybody that the links to this document, the Climate Ready Trees document, are included in our resource list that will be posted on the website.
Yeah, and if we can get back to the participant that asked that question, I can get that information.
Sure, I have recorded
Verify it,
his name. Okay.
Okay. Next slide. Yeah, right. And Paget was talking about this resource list. I'm not going to go through the details, but Judith Phillips, NMSU, has guides on tree selection, which include height, planting, and water requirements. The city and the state, the Office of the State Engineer has water-wise guides and xeriscape guides that are important. But the resource list for this presentation is much larger, and that is available along with the slides. Next. Okay, planting of the trees and shrubs. Once you've selected that right tree for the right site, it is critical that you plant that tree or shrub correctly. And just in summary, plant when it's cooler. Fall, late winter, early spring are ideal times to plant in our arid high desert climate. Roots have a chance to establish themselves, before you get into either extreme heat or extreme cold. And and the water evaporation loss is less. Late summer monsoon rainy season presents a shorter and less predictable opportunity to plant trees and shrubs, and that's going to vary around the area. But I think consistently we have higher relative humidity during that time. So if you do have a tree that needs to be planted, you know but just watch that tree, because we can get out of monsoon conditions very quickly, and you'll have to watch that tree so it doesn't dry out. Next. Other planting variables that you should consider: your soil. And then in addition to your soil, your landscape characteristics, soil, slope, drainage, and what kind of irrigation and watering method are you going to be using, or what do you currently have? And what can reach that tree or shrub properly. Other factors to consider for trees are mature size, obstructions, shade resistance, disease resistance, maintenance issues, whether it's flowering tree, a pollinator, wildlife benefit tree, and level of ornamentations. But soil, you definitely need to know your soil type. It's going to be some combination of sandy, clay, or loam. Sandy, rule of thumb, easy drainage, but it doesn't retain water very well. Clay soils, it's more difficult to achieve drainage, but clay soils will retain moisture longer. Compaction, do you have a recently have a new home, or has there been a road or a driveway installed recently? Compaction can have a either negatively impact the tree or just prevent the tree or shrub from growing. Salinity, we have pockets of salinity in our soils throughout New Mexico. pH, that's the level of acidity, and our soils are primarily alkaline in New Mexico. They're around the pH 8. Caliche is common in certain areas. In the foothills, those are calcium carbonate layers. And then we have usually less organic matter in our soils than in other states. Next. This is just a summary. I'm not going to go over this in great detail, but to the left, you have your soil composition triangle. The left side shows percent of clay, the right percent of silt, and on the bottom sand. Most of us have some combination of those. And then I think more importantly, I'd like to cover the percentage of the mineral versus air and water. So in soil composition, typically here in New Mexico, we have mineral particles amount to 45%, and water 25%, and air 25%. These are not compacted soils. This is an ideal soil situation, I should say, not just in New Mexico, but all over. Mineral particles are predominant, and then organic matter is just 5%. And in some of our soils here in New Mexico, we may have less than that. But if you do not have enough air, and I mean well distributed, these components should be well distributed, not just in discrete amounts like the pie chart shows. But if they're well distributed, then you will have good soils for planting. Compacted soils, those that have that are near construction or heavily trafficked areas, will have little or no airspace. They'll have less than 25%, and that will negatively affect moisture absorption and drainage. And that will retard, if you plant in those soils without amending them, they will retard root growth and kill trees and shrubs. Next. Soil chemistry, and just a brief summary. Characteristics in New Mexico soils are heavily influenced by rainfall quantity, and I should have also put in our geology of our soils, our historical geology. But typical New Mexico soils, like I said, high alkalinity, pH of around 8. Caliche is common, salinity, low organic matter. So it's important to and this can vary along any site. So if you should be well aware of what's on your property. It might take you a little longer to find that out and discover either through testing or or maybe you've tried to plant something like a tree that did not work, and perhaps soil was your issue. Next, please.
Sandy, we have a question. Somebody's asking, how much does it have to rain to benefit our tree roots?
Well, we only get the amount of rain that nature presents. Like I said, I think I said earlier that most trees benefit from annual 20 inches, but we have only 11 to 12. So we need to supplement our rainfall, and that's going to be, and I'm going to go through that. We're going to supplement that with rainfall, with irrigation methods, either hose watering, other irrigation methods. We have to, use catchment features in our landscape that help retain water, and then we should do rainfall harvesting. But the best, you need to water your tree deeply, and I'm going to go over that concept in more detail here shortly. Deeply means cover all roots, and from the top of your soil substrate down to below the roots. And trees generally are down 18 to 24 inches. So you need to water an established tree and new trees deeply, but in different ways as the tree roots grow. And I'll go over that in more detail.
So the Janet is asking this question, and she's wondering, in a single rain event, how much rain really would we need to get?
I've seen, like in some literature, at least 1 inch of rainfall. Well, but even for that, they still recommend, we recommend like once a month deep watering for established trees, or maybe a couple times a month during the hottest part of the growing season. So 1 inch, and that 11 to 12, it doesn't always come in, like in discrete monthly amounts, but 1 inch, I think, is what in our arid climate, if we could get that is good.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Next. Okay, so I'm going to start with tree planting first. And shrubs, and this applies to shrubs too. And many of our trees with multiple trunks technically are shrubs. So you can purchase them or obtain them in bare root, which configure, and that's common with fruit trees. So you just need to trim long roots if needed. Ball and burlap, nursery trees, and then we have container trees and shrubs from nurseries. For those ball and burlap nursery trees, be sure to remove the burlap and any wire before you plant in our Southwest soils. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. You want to provide the best environment for your newly planted trees, for the roots to grow out directly to the soil, your surrounding soil. The ball and burlap, the burlap on the bald root trees will prevent that, will retard it. And in the lack of moisture and relative humidity in our environment will prevent the burlap from breaking down. And wireframe is the same thing. You need to remove that. Container trees and shrubs. They're because it depends on when they're purchased. If you purchase a container tree and shrub in late summer or fall, it's most likely going to be a root-bound specimen. So you can ask at the nursery for the nursery manager to say, hey, I'm concerned about this specimen. Have them, remove it from the root ball from the container, and you can inspect it. If it's very root bound and has roots that have circled around the container, unless you're prepared to manage that on your own, you may not want to buy it. But for moderately root bound specimens, you can splice and shave roots before you plant the root container, ball, or cylinder. And then cut large, arcing roots at the point where they start the arc. Next.
Janet is asking about the ball and burlap. She's saying that she loosened the burlap and removed the wire. Is it okay? Will the burlap rot away if it hasn't been removed? If it's been just loosened?
And the tree's already planted?
I believe so.
Yeah, well, I would just, if it's loosened, I don't think it's worth removing the tree unless the tree shows signs of failing, and then you might want to do it. I would just add some maybe additional water to help break down that burlap, just through the next couple of years. Eventually it will break down. It depends on how long the tree has been in the ground. If the tree is doing well, I would just do that, just adding additional deep watering on that interface where from the root ball to where the burlap is just there. I would just concentrate watering on that end around there. If you just planted it and it's a relatively small tree, you might want to consider replanting it and removing the burlap. It's a judgment call.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like it's been in the ground for 2 weeks, I read.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, if it's relatively small, I would probably recommend that. But if it's been in there for a year or two, and the tree seems to be growing well, then you might want to judge on not replanting. Yeah, she said it's a big tree. Well, there again, too, it's just, now that's where you need to really talk to people that supply your trees, because I know I've had a tree where the planting people tried to talk me out of removing a wireframe, but you have to be strong about that. Wireframe, and sometimes I've seen trees that have failed in home visits, and when you dig them up or you see signs of a wireframe, it's just going to be more difficult for the roots to establish. Just be sure you're watering that tree properly going forward. And then I'll discuss that here shortly. Next. Okay, this just is an illustration of how you can prepare your root ball or your container cylinder. Splicing or shovel shaving. And splicing is taking your contained root ball and taking the edge of a sharp trowel or a knife and going to vertical cuts all along the circumference of the root ball or container. And then for shovel splicing, if you feel like you're pretty adept at using your shovel and it has to be somewhat of a sharper edge, you can just shave off rectangular sections all around the diameter of the tree. And this really doesn't, you don't have to be afraid about damaging the tree. It's going to have enough roots So it's, but you're trying to eliminate that dense root growth that's on the surface of the cylinder or the ball. And the root balls before and after shaving, you can see the difference there.
Sandy, are you also shaving the bottom?
Yes, if you have some like long roots, you can do that too. You can cut them, and then definitely you can shave those too. Or you might even want to cut it with a pruning shear. But if it looks really nasty and overgrown, yeah, definitely shaving is fine. Mhm.
Monica's asking if she can also do that with a Spanish broom if the roots are coiled as well. She doesn't really want
Yes,
to cut away
do
too
this with any plant, shrub. Spanish broom is a shrub. So you do this with any plant, even your little garden plants that are overgrown, like vegetable plants. But there with vegetable plants, you have to be a lot more delicate though in your methods.
Somebody else is asking if there's an ideal age to transplant trees from their growing containers.
Yeah. Mhm.
Has 2 desert willows grown from seed that are a year old in the containers.
Yeah. Desert willow is kind of a more difficult plant. I would keep it in the container for a while. And I know, and then if you're buying a nursery specimen too, their nursery professional will still say, yeah, you should have root growth, that's pretty much in the container, and you can remove it and kind of experiment to find out where the root growth is going. But if your root growth is, up to the container, yeah, it's time to transplant it. Or you might want to shave off a little section just to see where the roots are. But I would be, yeah, especially desert willow. If you did it from seed, I would keep it in the container longer. I can't tell you how much longer, but it's just kind of I would remove it from the container and just see shave some of it out and see how well the roots are growing before you plant it. Next.
Monica, who asked about the Spanish broom, was curious about how much should we trim off when you're doing this?
Well, it depends on the size, obviously, the size of your container. Like the specimen in here, like I would say that's probably about a foot in diameter. And you can, like if you just shave off an inch or two, if it's a smaller plant, then do less. Yeah, you don't, well, even, I mean, you can do bare root plantings, but for some of the more native plants that they may not take hold without, enough soil. So it just, I can't give you specifics, but it depends on the, really basically the size of your contained container. So here I would say it's about an inch, considering it's about a foot in diameter, and they shaved off an inch or two. And the roots tend to go, those circling roots or those matted roots are pretty much at the surface. And it's more important that and if you go to the next slide, deal with the really large roots that are starting to circle. Okay, well, this one's just more of it. If you look at, this is from a crabapple tree planting that my husband and I did. If you look at number 2, like it's pretty concentrated now. And I got that specimen in this fall. It was a late specimen. So it did already have signs of larger roots, matted roots, circling roots. And so like 3, I started splicing and shaving, with a trowel and a knife. And number 4 is at the end, and number 4 is the completed product. But I don't show it here, but there was some very large circling root at the bottom, which I clipped off. So you want to make the direction of that root go out radially or straight in a radial direction. You do not want it to arc around the root ball. So you want to remove that curve. You want to remove the arc at the point where it starts to curve. Next, and I think I have an illustration on what can happen. Next slide, please. Okay, this is 2 photos that show mature root growth on established, this is an established tree. The one on the left, they remove the soil, the top soil, inches of soil, just to show how the roots are growing. All of them, there's some really large roots, and then there's the smaller roots, and then we don't see the feeding roots that are out there further in diameter beyond the tree's canopy. But as you can see, all these roots are growing out straight in a radial fashion, and they provide the right architecture to support a large shrub or a tree, particularly for large trees. You need that architecture, or otherwise your tree will fall in wind and other stresses. So that's now if, like, say, if you leave a large root that tends to want to circle, you can years later see signs of this, and we call these girdling roots, and they can be above the soil or they can be slightly below the soil. And these are hard to detect. Sometimes there's a bulge at the bottom of the trunk that's not part of the root flare, or if people have trees that have been pretty well established, or maybe are 5 or 6 years old, and they start to deteriorate, or maybe a decade old, I would definitely check for, dig down and see what's going on with the roots. And also, the tree may have been planted too deeply. That's another sign, and I'll go through that when I go through tree planting. So this, if you see this soon, you can do a root pruning. You might need, most likely will need a professional arborist to do this, or a service. But just be aware of this. It's more frequent than you think.
So Janet is asking, should those roots be removed?
Yes. If you want, like, say the tree is worth saving, it hasn't completely died, or it's not so far gone. Yes, you can have, I would hire a professional, unless you feel very confident about it, to, you have equipment, but it's called root pruning. But I would personally recommend hiring a tree service with a certified arborist on staff for that. They can advise you, and they do those types of remediations.
And we're also being asked if, this might be referring back to the trimming or cutting of the roots, if you could simply pull the roots straight with your finger instead of cutting them.
No, they sort of have a memory. If it's a small root, yes, like in a vegetable plant or a small shrub. But if it's, if it's something like a 1/4 inch in diameter, that root has memory, because because of the way the cells have grown around it. So the best thing is just to cut it off, and it's usually evident at the surface, like where to, and you never know, but even like just, some basic remediations like that, the shaving, cutting the roots off, even if you don't think you have it cut off at the point of the arc, but just see at what point it starts arcing. It doesn't have to be perfect, but like if it looks pretty much like it's going to go out in a radial direction, then that should serve the purpose.
And could you recommend a book or information about roots and soil, how long they need to grow and the like? I'm not exactly sure what Monica's saying.
Is she the participant that asked about the broom?
Yes.
All right, broom.
Mm-hmm.
No, but we could look at that. I don't know if some of the references that we have indicated, but it's something that, Paget, if you can keep track of that.
Yes.
And let's get back to Monica. on that.
Okay, we will do that. Thank you. Would you like me to go to the next slide?
Yes, please. Okay, the next 3 slides are complicated, look really complicated with a lot of directions. They're arborist kind of engineering specs, and you may find them in detail on the urbantreefoundation.org site. And I'm just going to cover a tree planting and in unmodified soil, both on a flat grade and then on a slope grade, and then show that it's the same for a shrub. So first of all, like after you start out on this slide, this shows a deciduous tree with a finished root ball. And by finished root ball, it's been prepared, like it's, like where there are no, the roots are perfect. It's been shaved or spliced, or long roots have been clipped off and circling roots have been modified. So you start out with a root ball. And then also you need to, the root ball, the top of the root ball should be at the flare of the trunk. Sometimes some of those, some plants or some trees and shrubs, it's a little bit different. But, you might want to dig away from the soil a little bit. And if you already start seeing roots, then you are at the root flare. And the bottom of your root ball should be relatively flat and compacted. So you start out digging a tree that's 3 times the diameter of the widest part of your root ball or your container cylinder. And it can be sloped as you go down to the lowest depth. The depth of that hole should be the depth of your root ball from the top to the bottom. So particularly in our soils, and if you don't, and you use unmodified soils, the top of the root ball should be in line with your soil grade. And so when you place your root ball into the center of that hole, you can start backfilling with native soil. And then as you go up, you can take your shovel or even your hand or a trowel to kind of compact that, just compact the soil slightly around the root ball, because you want to eliminate large air spaces, but you don't want to have it so compacted that there's no air in the soil. So you keep doing that in 6-inch intervals until you get to the top. And then after that, you create a watering berm. And the watering berm is at the periphery of the root ball. And this, and it's all depends on the size of your tree, shrub, and root ball. So for smaller trees, your berm diameter is going to be small. Now this is really the watering berm. And as the tree or shrub grows, you're going to extend the diameter of that berm. But the berm is created, it's about 4 inches high, 8 inches wide, and it should be constructed along the periphery of the root ball. And after the soil is filled in, you can tamp it down slightly, fill it, water it along the periphery, water it deeply so that the water seeps down into those semi-compacted soil interfaces. And then finally, you finish the planting with mulch. Mulch is very important, and in this case, it's organic mulch. You can go up 3 or 4 inches. 4 inches is recommended here. And then that 4 inches goes until you get to the periphery of your tree ball area. And for there, you can keep like about a 1-inch mulch. And then keep the mulch away from your trunk, because you don't want, any like if it mulch will contain moisture, and you want to keep it away from the flare so that you don't encourage pests or fungal growth. And then too, like, and then you have an area for oxygen interface too. So this is your basic planting model. And I'm going to show, unless there's a question, I'm going to go to the next slide.
We have a couple questions. First of all, Joanne wants to know if you remove the container soil around the roots or just add with native soil.
Well, first of all, the container soil has been, your root ball has been modified by the techniques I showed previously, like the splicing and the shaving. And, in some cases you have a perfect root ball and you don't have to do anything. Like if you purchase your plant at the right time and the nursery professional or the grower tells you, yes, this is the right time. And, you might go in, and so you may not have to modify it much. Now, it sounds like there's a question about the backfill. Could you Paget, is that the case?
I think perhaps I'll read it again. Do you remove container soil around the roots or just add with native soil?
Well, you keep the soil. In this case, it's showing you retain the root ball soil.
Okay.
I mean, there are bare root plantings that you do. I'm not showing that here. Concepts are similar, like fruit trees.
Mm-hmm.
But there you use your root flare and keep that at the and then for roses and things like that too, you do bare root planting. It's slightly different. I'm doing the more common one on this illustration. In that case, you want to keep your root flare for trees at least, at the level of your soil.
And she is asking about the backfill, if it's going to be native soil.
You can, it's native soil here. If it's highly compacted, there are slightly different variations on amended soil. Now, if you're just mending it with compost, say that, just be aware, that you still need soil around your tree. Compost is organic matter, and organic matter will break down. And then you find, if you have used too much compost addition with your native soil, you might see your tree sink. And then, because we have a dusty climate, more earth soil will blow in around the tree, and then you find your root flare is planted too deeply. So if you do some modification, just be aware that it's going to break down. You may want to go slightly higher or tamp down the soil. Otherwise you don't really need to. And with most trees, your native soil is fine. And then you put your compost. If you want to add organic matter, then you can put your compost below your mulch layer in direct contact with the backfilled soil, and some on the tree ball area too.
And Michelle is asking about the berm. She's asking, does it mean, are you saying that the berm should be nearer to the outside of the canopy, or is that too far for larger trees?
You can do, let's say your tree is going to grow, like it's already a big tree, or you're going to create that like a final berm or dimension around that. Then you need a second berm. The berm I'm referring to here, or that's illustrated, is a watering berm. And I know a lot of people start out with doing, okay, my tree is going to have a canopy of, like 5-foot diameter or something like that. Or maybe it's already large. And then you commonly see a berm there. Now that could be a water catchment berm, like when it rains, or maybe you want to just create the landscape area. Now you don't have to, you can wait. It's your choice. That's a different berm. That's more of a, like what you consider a final berm. So this one is a watering berm, and because we are in drought, this watering berm helps you to concentrate the water where you need it for newly planted trees and shrubs. Now, for existing trees and shrubs, yes, you should have a berm that helps you catch water at the drip zone or canopy of the tree. So this is a newly planted tree. And newly planted trees come in various sizes and shapes.
Janet is asking if you recommend root stimulator.
Can't hurt. You don't really need it, but yeah. And maybe on some more difficult trees, yeah, those products are good. I'm not necessarily going to promote them because there's a lot of different products. I'm not selling products, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. And I would just follow the label instructions. But I've never used root stimulator on many trees. Now, I live in kind of a rural Placitas area. We have very extremely difficult soils. If I lose a plant, it's because I have caliche here. I wanted a tree in that area, and then you do, and then what happens is that if you have really bad soil around, compacted caliche, no matter what you do, even if you did proper tree planting, there's the roots will try to grow. They will stay in that little confined area of backfilled soil, and they will circle. They will not go out to the native soil. So root stimulator, yes, if you want to give your tree that added boost, just follow the label instructions on it. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Next slide. This is similar in plant. It shows on a grade, and I think the most important, because most of our surfaces are not flat. So how do you figure out where the substrate level is for the level of your for the top level of your root ball? And for that, what you want to do is kind of create an imaginary slope line that is collinear with the slope, and if you can kind of eyeball or imagine that slope line coming down at an angle to the center of your tree trunk, and then that's a good way to eyeball or imagine to know where your the top of your root ball should be. But other than that, follow the same planting specs that I reviewed before. Now the downslope part, after you and then the watering berm. The watering berm will be downslope, and you don't have to make it 360. Make it 180. In this slide, I think they're recommending 240 degrees. So that means, when you irrigate or when you have a rainfall or precipitation event, your natural water, due to gravitational flow, will go down the slope, and then you can contain it with that downslope berm catchment. And then too, the same with mulch. If you're doing compost, you can put your compost, like an inch or two of compost down first on your plant area. And this is beyond the periphery of the root ball. You can put a little bit around the root ball, but keep it low level, and along with your mulch, maybe half-inch compost, an inch mulch. But you want to concentrate your compost and mulch in the backfilled area and a little bit beyond. And if you want to do that, other berm for if you want to do your landscaping and your tree is going to grow to a certain mature height, you can do that too. But this watering berm is going to be moved out as the tree grows, and I'll show, and that's going to help you water during drought. Next slide. Okay, the next slide is just a shrub. The same principles apply as to trees. And I did the simplest example, unmodified soil, for unmodified soil. But if you want to look at specs for, like, say you have, compacted soils and you modify your soils, you can get them on urbantreefoundation.org. Next. Mulch, just summarize mulch. Organic mulch is the best mulch for tree cover, although you can do green mulch, ground covers. You can even, like, say you have a tree out in the open outside your courtyard and mulch just blows away or birds get into it. You can put some dispersed rock under a smaller layer of compost and mulch. And even the rock will help collect water, irrigation water, rainfall water, do moisture, and that will help encourage microbial activity. So mulch, it's not only compost, even mulch. Organic mulch in direct contact with the soil will eventually, along with watering, will encourage a microbial growth zone at the soil interface and prevent soil crusting. So basically, trees will grow in almost any soil in New Mexico if planted properly. Exceptions are highly compacted soils and caliche, and with the use of mulch and proper watering. Next. And oh, I should also say, just keep the mulch away from the tree trunk. Maybe, and this depends on the size. If it's a very small tree, it's less than 6 inches. Next slide. Okay, just to summarize benefits of mulch provides a cooling layer for roots, promotes a microbial interface between the mulch layer and soil, prevents a hard soil crust where there's no microbial activity, retains and collects moisture, controls evaporation, keeps the weeds down, so that the weeds aren't benefiting from your watering, but the tree roots will, or the shrub roots. Next slide.
I bought 2 of those sawhorses.
Oh, good. Which one?
The better ones.
Okay. And like I said, I just wanted to, like, there's some trees that do require more organic matter, and definitely fruit trees, you want to give them a lot of organic matter. So putting 2 inches of compost directly to the, for established trees, drip zone region of the tree, or that planted area for newly planted trees can be done, and then add 3 to 4 inches of organic mulch over the compost layer then. And then for watering trees, avoid watering on the leaves. You want to focus the water from the top of the soil line or substrate down. And that's how you water trees. You want to water them from all levels, even though typically tree roots are, for established, they're in the 18 to 24, but like feeding, like watering tubes do not provide that benefit. So you want top down, that's the best way. And then also any nutrients, organic matter from your compost or from your topsoil layers will percolate through the soil to the feeding root area.
We have a couple questions here, Sandy. Could you first define drip zone?
Okay, drip zone, and I will show here soon. Drip zone is your tree canopy, and drip zone is like if your tree if you had a rainfall event, or even if you watered the tree top down, which is not a water-wise way to conservative way to water in our drought. But if you did that, the water will drip on the outer leaves or conifer needles. And the drip zone is your outer diameter of where that occurs.
And
it's usually not in a discrete, 1 or 2 inches. It's, it depends on the size of the tree. So it could be, for a smaller tree, 6 inches for average, up to a foot. And for a really large established tree, it could be 2 or 3 feet and slightly inward from the canopy and then outward to get the feeding roots more concentrated outward from the largest diameter.
And should the mulch be applied every year?
Mulch does degrade. I think that's a good practice. And then sometimes it just gets dug into the soil. Yeah, and then a lot of times it just blows away. So I would look at it every season, whenever you get a change in season, because even through the summer we have high winds that'll blow away. So you might want to reapply it in the fall. Yeah, but definitely 1 inch is a good rule of every year, a rule of thumb. Now, if you might want to consider reusing that mulch to more like native areas too. You can, so that you're constantly, you're not just throwing it away into landfill. You can, if you have some outlying trees that nature afforded you, then you might want to put some of that mulch, older mulch there, or you can put it into areas that you're trying to build up in your landscape. Okay, hopefully I answered that.
And also, can you use chipped, non-pressure treated wood from pallets as mulch?
Yeah, and then I know there's studies on that I think wood chips are okay, but I've also heard that I've seen university studies, it's in some presentations that I went, that the shredded wood is better. Again, there's resources on that. I can't answer that directly, but like some of the larger chips are better for, like, if they don't blow off and they stay in place. I can't, that's something that we should get back
Okay.
to for research, because there is research that has been done on that.
Okay, got it.
Mhm.
Thank you. Next slide.
Okay, watering trees and shrubs in drought. I mean, for trees and shrubs to survive, you need to water them deeply. You want to cover all the roots, and particularly the feeder roots, the roots that are for established trees that are directly around the trunk are not feeder roots. But in newly planted trees, you are watering closer to the trunk, as illustrated in those tree planting slides. But so you want to maintain a relative consistent moisture level to the depth that includes all the roots. And this varies with trees and shrubs, how large the tree is and how old the tree is and when was the tree planted. So it's really knowing your soils and knowing your soil and your species of the tree or shrub. So newly planted trees have to be watered frequently, and this is even in the cool fall season. You water frequently, almost every day initially, and it could be 5 to 10 gallons for maybe a small to moderately large newly planted tree. And it could take 2 to 3 years for that tree to be fully root established. So you gradually want to wean the tree from the more frequent watering every day. And this could be seasonal. Like if you did plant when it was pretty hot and dry, you may want to, and it's going to be hot and dry the next 2 or 3 weeks, keep that up. But then gradually wean that tree from frequent watering and go to every other day, and then gradually to once a week, or for newly planted trees in the summer season. And eventually you want to wean it to every 10 days to 2 weeks. But again, that depends on a lot of different variables. Mature tree watering. Water deeply at the drip zone, and as I described, or the tree canopy. 360 degrees around, ideally. Some trees are going to be difficult to do that if they're planted near a wall or a building. And then top down, like I said, top down in the soil, top of the soil downward. And less frequently. You want to wean mature trees from really frequent watering. They don't really benefit from that. And they have and they should have, if they've been planted frequently and they've grown well, they should have a large area where they can absorb moisture. So, you're watering more area, but you're going down deeper, and then your lower levels of your soil will maintain that moisture longer. And if you do have a precipitation event, those feeder roots are going to be able to benefit from rain and precipitation, or maybe even existing soil moisture in around your landscape. And to know about this, it's kind of it is an art. However, there are gauges that you can use to gauge the soil before watering. So, and I'll talk about that. So next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to talk about watering a relatively, kind of a smaller tree, but it applies to larger newly planted trees too for the first 2 years. And remember, I talked about that watering berm. This illustration from Trees for Missoula, shows that watering berm. And it's not your final berm that that a lot of people think about in landscapes. And so newly planted trees need more water, and they really, like a slow flowing hose oftentimes is your best bet to water, unless you have a lot of resources and time to do a 360 degree emitter type system. Although if you have that water berm, maybe if it's a very small tree, 1 or 2 emitters will be enough. But that tree is going to grow. Your watering berm is going to be increased. That's something you have to do on your own manually. And then you're going to need to get that 360 degree watering. You're going to need more emitters if you do use an automatic irrigation system. So the slow flowing hose technique is really good for newly planted trees or established trees. And if you do already have your trees on emitters, it's a good way to supplement watering. So you're sure to get that deep watering that it's very difficult in zoned emitter systems. And many people don't even have zoned systems for their irrigation system. So the amount of water depends on the size of a newly planted tree, but if you fill that watering berm in and do a very slow moving hose, you can also do a soaker hose. A soaker hose is going to take longer, but and then you might, if the tree is very far away from your water source, you may have to use a bucket, like a 5-gallon bucket to carry water, but do it very slow and concentrate on that root ball periphery. So sometimes, like I talked about watering a newly planted tree, first, second week, and this is probably, it could be more depending on the size of the tree and the weather conditions. Like a drought, you might have to extend that a little bit more. Water every other day. By the 3rd week, gradually taper off every other day. And you could always go back to a little bit more frequent watering if there's a severe drought for a few days. By the 4th or 6th weeks, it'd be good to 3 times a week, 3 or 4 times a week. So you want to maintain the schedule through the warm to hot growing season, and even during cooler months if the ground is not frozen. But, as we go into the late summer, fall, you'll start to taper off that watering so that the tree can go into a dormancy. Next. We talked about that watering berm, and you're going to be expanding that diameter during the next 2 to 3 years to encourage feeder root growth. So, don't And then it'll most likely break down to it as a soil berm. So, and then you want to concentrate your tree on, so as you just gradually increase that berm out, so you know where to focus your watering, and continue with that slow flowing hose, multiple emitters spaced around the expanded watering zone circumference, or irrigation bags. And I'll show you some photos of irrigation bags. Eventually the water berm can be eliminated on a flat landscape, or you just might want to, delineate the tree from surrounding turf or other landscape, and then you could create a larger landscape that corresponds to the tree drip line or canopy. If beware, like if you choose a location and if you have strong winds, you may have to stake a newly planted tree. This is an illustration that's showing the best way to stake. You put 2 stakes into the backfill area, so that they go down to the depth of your your regular soil, and then you use flexible tape or flexible cloth to support that tree. And you should do it in 2. You could do it in 3 points around the tree, but only do that for the first 2 years or so, unless you have a very windy, but definitely not more than 2.5 years, because you want the tree to start adapting to the wind so that it can be stronger, so it can maintain and developing the cellular growth that enables the tree to become strong, the branches to become strong and all that. Oops, I did the chat. Hold on. Next slide, please. Okay, this could help you with small trees. And I think you might have seen these in nurseries, but they're irrigation bags. And I think they might be useful for the first year. They could be prone to wildlife holes, just like hoses are. So you may want to protect those areas like with a wire frame or something, chicken wire, so the wildlife doesn't get in there. And also solar conditions may deteriorate the bags, but this could be a helpful way to irrigate newly planted trees. And I would there's a variety of trees. I have not used these, but I think they might be something to look into. And you can go on Amazon or any other site and get some more information. You can talk to your nursery or tree hardware store professionals, and they could give you more. And I would just follow the instructions. The one on the right was a product from Amazon, and it claims that you should put the tree branches should be at least 25 inches from the ground or higher for this particular product. It's 21 inches. And the tree trunk diameter should be 2 to 8 inches for one bag. So it's not going to work on the really tiny trees. So somebody asked about the drip line. Well, this is a illustration from Trees for Missouri showing an established tree. The drip line corresponds, it's the largest diameter of the tree canopy, the leaf tree canopy. And then it goes down to, it's a vertical line that goes down to the soil. So, and the drip line, if you can look on a top view, it'd be a circle that corresponds to the tree largest diameter of the tree canopy. So for established trees, you want to extend your watering 2 to 3 times the canopy. And concentrate, the ideal water zone is somewhat inside, and this is depending on the size of the tree. You might want to go like maybe for a 15-20 foot tree, about a foot more inside the water, but just don't concentrate it around the trunk. And, sometimes gravity, there's going to be some backflow towards the trunk too. So don't get too concerned about that. But the focus should be around the drip line, and then the watering of 2 to 3 times the canopy. And that could be 2 to 3 feet out from the flat plane drip line. And then for watering depth, go down to below 18 to 24 inches, ideally. For some soils, that could be difficult to do. You might have to do that over maybe a couple deep watering incidences, a couple days. If you can get it down below the 24 inches, then your soil will stay moist above that level longer. So the frequency is every 2 to 3 weeks around now. We're getting into warm weather, and for more sensitive trees, every 2 weeks. And then you could taper off as we get into the shorter days of summer, the monsoon season, and late summer to early fall, to start tapering off to every 3 weeks, and then gradually go down to every 4 weeks. For shrubs, also size dependent. Some shrubs are as large as trees. Typically you water them to a depth of 12, but if it's a shrub type of tree, I would water down to at least 18 inches. And for shrub type trees, I'm thinking of Crepe Myrtles, New Mexico privets, lilac. Lilac trees are pretty drought resistant, so 12-inch may be sufficient for them. Okay, next slide. So, and even in mature trees, the differ in watering needs. You have to research them. That's why some of those bulletins from NMSU, your nursery professionals can help you. The Climateready tree specs can help you. So the watering needs are going to be dependent on size, age, species, and of course soil types. If you have a more sandy soils, which are common in our area, it's easy to get below that 12-24 inches, but the upper levels are going to dry out sooner. So you're going to have to water more frequently in sandy soils. With clay soils, it's going to take you longer to reach a depth, but once you do that, you don't have to water as frequently. And of course, runoff, you have to consider runoff. So you could be wasting some water, and then definitely create berms that will collect water so you're not wasting water. And seasonal temperatures, evaporative loss is a consideration. And then some tree roots will absorb water more effectively. And that's species related and oftentimes age related too. Older trees may not be as vigorous, and they may need some special care. So like I said, research your trees' needs. And even drought resistant trees need consistent watering, particularly in their, when you've just planted them. So when you're going through severe periods of drought, give your drought resistant trees some more watering than you would in a normal season. But don't overwater, because overwatering can be just as bad as no water. Because if you water too frequently, you don't allow your soil to drain or even dry out between waterings to like a depth of 4 or 5 inches. You're going to and if you have clay soils, you have to be more careful. you're going to have soggy soils, and that will kill tree roots because they cannot, because that water pushes out the air and you will not have any oxygen. It depletes the oxygen in the soil. So there you have to judge by the feel of your soil. And good practice is to let the ground dry out between waterings, particularly for more established trees. Next.
Sandra, are you going to talk about how we can determine how deeply we have watered?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, and now I'll go over these. Like this is, if you use automatic irrigation or systems, this is just a kind of an idea that you can use. It applies to both newly planted trees and to existing trees. It's either emitter, there's a series of emitters, but this will reach your ideal watering zone. In this case, I think it looks like an established tree. I would have, if their mulch is any indication, they really need to extend the diameter, the inner diameter, the outer diameter for this tree. If it's a newly planted tree, it's probably okay. And then notice that there's way too much mulch around the trunk. But I wanted to use this photo saying that there are ways you can do like more automatic watering instead of the slow flowing hose. Next. So estimating how often to water. Yeah, and did we skip the, I don't know if we skipped the, no, I did, no, okay, go back to the slide. Yeah, so estimating, take a spade and carefully dig down. I mean, simple, this is simple. Dig down 4 to 5 inches. Just be careful, that you're not getting into some, a concentration of roots. But do it in the area you've been watered. If the soil below this level feels moist, then you should be fine, and you could hold off on watering. If the soil is dry to the touch below, you should water, because the surface will dry out sooner. There are ground moisture meters that can be used to check for soil depths of 2 to 3, and that should be feet, not 2 to 3 inches. I'm sorry, that 2 to 3 feet. So, and I want to say that automatic turf emitter sprinkling watering is not enough, is not sufficient to water the tree that is planted amid your turf. And so emitter water and sprinkler water is typically is meant for soaking down to a depth of 4 to 6 inches, which is appropriate for grasses, for turf grasses. This is not enough for a young tree or a mature tree. So if your tree benefits from, benefits from that automatic sprinkler, just supplement it with some deeper watering. That's, every 2 weeks or so. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to cover more, the slow flowing drip watering hose, best for shrub and watering. If you're watering like once a month right now, you might have to transition to every 3 weeks or twice a month by mid-May. And June typically is our driest, hottest month. So, and the frequency is dependent on several variables. I'm going to talk about and be sure to move that hose around 360 degrees around your trunk planted area, but concentrate on the drip zone or the planting zone. Next. Soaker hoses are pretty good to do too. I mean, if you have several lengths of soaking hoses, they can be snaked around a tree. And this photo shows a tree that wasn't benefiting from 360 degree watering, but you can do it on top of the landscape. For rockscape and landscape cloth, it will work if you have a lot of soil that has built up around on top of your landscape cloth. You may I would recommend pulling the rock and landscape away from the tree so that it can benefit from more direct watering. If you're doing moving a slow flowing hose, you can put it under, create a slit in your landscape cloth, take advantage of gravity, and let that hose just drip and kind of run along the upper region of the tree, and then move it around as needed. Next slide. Okay, measuring water applications by hoses and sprinklers. Like I said, young trees, that are reasonable in size could be 5-10 gallons of water each time they are watered. Like if you're using a slow flowing hose, you can time it to see how long it takes to fill a 5-gallon bucket. Soaker hoses, here's some data that are at least 5/8 of an inch. This data comes from Trees for Missoula. It will take 200 minutes to deliver an inch of water. We talked about that inch of precipitation. So say you want to water a maturely established tree and give it 1 inch of water. Keep that soaking hose all on, like several, lengths of soaking hose circled around the tree or snaked around the tree. You have to keep that on for 2.5 hours. And for sprinklers and emitters, you can place a container that can measure water beneath the, where the flow is concentrated. Next slide. Okay, gauging moisture. There's all kinds of soil gauges that you can purchase. Go to your local hardware store, look online. Some have other purposes, like to take soil samples out of it, but they can be used too to gauge moisture in that area that you are going to collect a sample. So say you go down a foot to collect a sample. If the soil just falls out of that little pocket of the soil sample contained area, then it's dry. If it remains in there, or if it's really wet, then well, you have soil moisture, or you've overwatered, or you need to allow that soil to dry out. But you can make a low-tech version of that by taking a length of rebar, 3 to 4 feet. You can weld a T-handle on the blunt end and mark off feet on from the tip of the rebar. And you can gradually screw that into the soil. Some soils are going to be difficult to go down. And they try to go down 2 or 3 foot depth, so that in an area that's been watered, but is but it's a small area, so it probably won't damage your roots. Unscrew the probe. If the soil remains on the threads, then it's moist to that depth. But there's also more higher tech soil probes and that have pH meters, electrical conductivity meters. These typically work in, they're usually only for a depth of 12 inches or so, but you can probably investigate those. But I would recommend digging down and using that if you want to go down to lower depths. And then because they're more sensitive, they're not going to, it's going to be difficult to enter into more compacted soils. They're better used for farm, for crops or for garden plants. And then you have the least high-tech method, which is digging down at least 5 inches and then just feeling the soil below that area and find out if the soil is dry below there, to use that as a way to gauge and estimate if you should water again. Next. Talked about water conservation in the hottest part of the summer and in drought. You're going to have it's best to establish good cultural practices for watering. Water at a regular time when the sun is not high and temperatures are relatively cool. And from early in the morning works best for, and then you also have a higher relative humidity during that time. So you're going to get less evaporative loss. However, if your tree needs or shrub needs to be watered, we do live in an arid climate, so you can do evening waterings or if need be. The image on the left shows the water cycle for plants. Either have precipitation or you have irrigation, and that goes into the soil around the plant. And then you have evaporation that occurs from the soil. And then as the plant takes up the water through its roots, it travels through the plant, and then the water is lost at the edges of the leaves, or the stomatas sometimes will open up at the bottom, or the stomatas at the bottom of the leaf. So then you get this transpiration loss. So there's a kind of term called evapotranspiration. That is equal to the plant evaporation plus plant transpiration. So your total landscape evapotranspiration is the sum of the evapotranspiration of the various plants and the water loss to deep percolation or to runoff. And this phenomenon leads to an issue that you see in some plants, oftentimes fruit plants and more sensitive trees. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, this is fine. This is, the textbook evapotranspiration description. Plants in the landscape absorb water from the soil through its roots. The water is then used for metabolic, physiologic functions. The water eventually is released to the atmosphere as vapor through the plant stomata. Those are those tiny pore-like structures on the surfaces of the leaves. Next. And what I was talking about, that on very hot summer days, the plant will take up a lot of water through its system, and then it will, along with the salts that are already in the soil and the water, and it'll concentrate that water at the leaf tips where it will transpire, and leaving the salts that have the concentrated salts. And that will cause, and that along with a heat and solar will create the burned edges that you see. And for that, some tree and shrub species are going to be more sensitive to that. The other thing is to, establish good regular watering, regular watering schedule. Don't overwater the tree when you think it looks wilted. Keep to that regular water schedule. If you have confidence that you were doing good watering, frequent watering, but a little dry out is fine, then you don't have to worry. Now, the only thing is that newly planted plants, you will have to water more frequently. And then the other, watering deeply, that whole concept of watering deeply below the plant roots will also minimize this issue, because what you're doing is that the water pushes the salts that are already in the soil down below the roots, so that the moisture that is above that depth will, that's where your roots will take up, and will have less salts. Next slide. Since we're heading into, in preparation for the monsoon season and even for rare rain events that we have, it's always a good idea to be able to collect rainwater for future use. The photos above show active rainfall harvesting from a roof. The photo on the left is a guttered system that is piped directly into a tank, or that's almost cistern size. And the photo on the right shows roof water flowing down through the canales, and it will go into a rain barrel that will store the water for subsequent use. Next slide. But even if you don't have cistern or rain barrel water, you can create landscape features. The one that we talked about earlier, the berm, the simple earth berm, or you can have rock berms. And if you have multiple trees planted on a slope, or multiple shrubs and they're on an incline, you can water the upper one first, and then allow for that water to flow to the next one, and then the furthest one down the slope. And each one of those plants will have its own berm collection. You may want to create a little channel between the or some sort of feature to encourage the water to go directly downstream to the subsequent berm. And you don't need a whole lot of slope for that too. You can employ that in relatively flat, but if your landscape has a slight slope, that would work. These are called passive water harvesting features, and it can be used for irrigation or for rainwater. And they also help to prevent erosion on slopes. But in addition to that, in addition to berms, you see dry riverbeds that help divert water, rainwater, roof rainwater to planted areas, terracing, French drains, which are drains that are buried underneath the ground, and that can route water to landscaped areas. Sloped driveways act like catchment surfaces, parking lots, and roads too. Next slide. Here's just illustration from New Mexico Rainwater Harvesting Manual. These are simple roof rainwater collections without barrels. The one on the top shows a berm landscape that has a slight slope, and so gutter water is routed around that bermed area, and it benefits the plants that are planted in the berm. Or you can do a French drain, as the lower photo shows. Next slide, I mean. Here's another one from boomerangs, where if you have a lot of orchard trees or trees on a sloped landscape, it shows how water, I mean, even if they're not planted in a linear fashion, as long as they are planted at a lower elevation of the upper level tree, they can benefit from slope runoff and precipitation and irrigation. And the circle shows how the boomerang, is buttressed by rock to keep it in place. Next slide. Let's go, now that we covered planting and watering, the drought will also encourage, and hot temperatures encourage, pests and diseases in trees and shrubs. So the best defense that we have, and the easiest for most homeowners, and even in parks and in forests, is the concept of integrated pest management. Now, it takes longer, it's not immediate, but in the long run, it will pay off. So, and it's as simple as selecting the right tree species that we already talked about, that is tolerant to heat and drought stressors. Proper site selection. You know, you want the tree, your newly planted tree and your existing trees benefit from the right site selection, where you have, you know, it is protected against wind, it's watered correctly, it has the correct amount of light, you have a good soil, and it's mulched. If the homeowner and or park establishment is watering trees properly, that's important. Overwatering can kill roots and encourage weeds and promote disease. Underwatering obviously leads to drought stresses and encourages and increases pest susceptibility. So you want that, you know, that mid-range watering, that correct watering. In preparation for the drought, if you haven't already, remove plant and non-beneficial insect debris from your landscape to reduce any overwintering pests. And then strand management and diversity in planted species helps, and also it helps in our own residential landscapes too. For more information on integrated pest management, go to that NMSU guide H174, and that's on the reference list. Next slide. I'm just going to show a few examples of mistletoe, which is common on our juniper trees and also cottonwoods in the bosque. It is a parasitic plant. It's not encouraged by, or it doesn't come about from drought, but it's already there because birds who have eaten seeds and berries from trees that are already infected will transmit the infection to other trees that they perch on and poop on. So in drought stressed trees will be affected more from mistletoe. Mistletoe generally doesn't kill trees. It might reduce the long life of a tree, but if the tree is already stressed by drought, it can definitely damage the tree and lead to death. And I've seen that here in Placitas with junipers that are planted too closely to paved roads, that you can tell when it's combined with periods of stress, drought stress. Many of them, if they may have already been infected with mistletoe, and they're more easily infected after they've been drought stressed. So if it's a specimen that you can easily reach, and if it's in your immediate landscape area, remove the infested branches is the best. Just go through correct pruning methods down to the next branch juncture, 4 to 6 inches below where the mistletoe is. Or you can rub off the area and of the plant, wrap it with some sort of black plastic or electrical tape, and that will solarize the mistletoe. So just keep watching that, particularly on more prized juniper and cottonwood trees that you have in your landscapes. Next. Bagworms. I'm not going to mention all the pests that we have in here, but bagworms are a common sign along our bosque, Rio Grande bosque areas, and They're already on our surrounding landscapes on fruit trees and conifer trees. If you haven't already cleaned your trees off last fall or through the winter, please remove those bagworms, the cocoons off. If you see them, remove them, just throw them in a bucket of water or in a plastic bag and solarize them. Because if they have not already emerged, each of those cocoons contain 10,000 plus eggs. Now, timing for treatment of the bagworm caterpillar is probably now in some areas on fruit trees in the valley. Contact your local extension agricultural agent if you want to treat it. The treatment is when the little caterpillars are out actively eating the leaves, and you can use a bacterial method, Bacillus thuringiensis, containing insecticide. But contact your local extension agent or professional pesticide applicator professional for a recommendation, and always read label instructions in applying that. But your hand removal at certain times, particularly in the spring to late spring or fall, is your best method. But most trees in the bosque don't even benefit from removal of those cocoons. Next slide. Check for other diseases. Even in times of drought, you can have fungal diseases. The photo on the left is kind of a rare plum shot hole disease that our extension service diagnosed a couple summers ago, and it was right on a residential property. Pinon pine tip moth damage is going to be more apparent here in the next week or so. Just manage that. It's not going to kill. Pine tip damage doesn't kill a more mature pine trees, but it does cause damage. You can prune those off, to eliminate the signs of the damage. Next slide. So basically, just to summarize, drought and tree, IPM mitigation techniques, good cultural practices, tree selection, good watering, mulching, all those things really benefit the tree and protect it from insect and fungal diseases. Mechanical controls of insect pests are the best. Hand removal. If you have aphids, high pressure water spraying. And many times the aphids will just go away or on its own because of beneficial insects like ladybugs. You can do insect trapping for around fruit trees. Pruning sticky barriers also. Biological controls of insect pests. There's predatory insects that can control insect offending pests. So you want to promote a diversity of plants around your landscapes. Use pollinator friendly plants. Consult your local extension office for other information, or your master gardener groups. They can help you with that. Chemical control should be the last resort. And there you have to consult an extension agent or specialist or somebody or an applicator that has a pesticide license. And for that, there's synthetic and naturally derived compounds that regulate insects and hormone growth, and some use hormone growth interrupters. But again, use that as the last resort. Next slide. I just want to go, it's not just our landscapes and parks and that are prone to stress. It's also our rural areas, our conifer forest, our native pinon, spruce, and juniper ponderosa have been threatened. We've lost a lot of pinon trees in the last 2 droughts. That will most likely continue this season. Next slide. I got some interesting information from a Forest Service report that was published early this year. They said that our winters recent winters have been compounded by La Nina ocean cooling that reduces evaporation and results in even more arid conditions in our Southwest states. In the last drought, we've lost 350 million pinons. Last droughts since the early 2000s, we've lost 350 million pinons, and then more died in that next decade drought from a severe attack of IPS pinon bark beetle infestations. Now, what's remaining, we hope, the forest people hope that the stock that is remaining is and emerging is more resistant to drought and to bark beetles, but time will tell. And they're expecting another bad year for pinons. Next slide. Ponderosa pines are threatened. They're yellowing, and that's a clear sign of drought stress. And in this past decade, spruce beetles have been devastating spruce trees in that are scattered around in forested areas. So drought stress, this is important to know, drought stress in trees reduces the level of sap resin, which is needed to fight out invading beetles and insects. So be careful if you're taking back contaminated firewood from our forests, because that can threaten your own pinons and spruces and ponderosa pines. Next slide. Pruning trees and shrubs in drought. I'm just going to go very quickly through this. Most pruning should have been done in the dormant season, just prior to bud growth for established trees. Your fruit tree pruning should be done for the most part, unless it's apple trees in colder areas. Wait till after your spring shrubs, spring blooming or early blooming shrubs have flowered. And that's quince. Quince shrubs you can prune those now. Lilac are still in bloom, so wait till they completely finish their blooming cycle before pruning them. Western sand cherries are in bloom. Brooms are a little later in May to early June, and you could trim those out then. But now through the drought season, remove dead branches anytime. Remove diseased or infected branches anytime. Now, crown reduction may still be needed for large trees, like large cottonwood trees that are posing a danger to structures or surrounding houses. But for that, I would recommend consulting a tree service, an arborist for that. Best to prune young trees prior to planting to favor a central leader. And for that, you can ask your nursery professional to do that. But there are resources on how to do that too. Keep up with regular annual pruning. Use sharp, clean tools, and clean your tools between specimen pruning. Do not prune drought-stressed trees, however, as we go into, and particularly when we go into the hottest part of the year, just leave them alone and wait till we get into a cooler period. And finally, the last slide. Next slide. Just in summary, just some takeaways. Select the right tree, shrub for the right place. Diversify tree selection and planting to mitigate and adapt to our climate change. Plant only when it is cool. So delay summer planting to late summer, early fall. Plant correctly for long-term sustainability of your tree and shrub. Mulch trees and shrub for their cooling effect and microbial benefit. Water trees slowly, deeply, and regularly as established in early morning. And there's a lot of variations in that. Conserve water by gauging soil moisture between watering. Collect rainwater and irrigation water passively and direct that water to other trees and shrubs in your landscape. Follow principles of integrated pest management to control pests, and that will help us in the next years and decades. Avoid structural tree pruning in summer drought, exception being dangerous trees. Inspect, and then also go out often, even if it's really hot and uncomfortable outside. Go out and inspect your trees and shrub for any signs of new heat stress, drought stress, and insect or disease. Because many times, I know from the experience of the extension and master gardeners, when we go through periods of like extreme heat and drought, like in June, oftentimes we don't hear about tree problems until it's July when when people get out again, the monsoon rainy season is imminent, and we have higher relative humidity and it's a little cooler. So, but do this, go out often and check your trees. Remember, trees and shrubs are our most valuable landscape investment. And I thank you for your patience. I know this was a long presentation, so thank you for attending.
Thank you so much, Sandy, for sharing your extensive knowledge on this subject with us. I know that it's a very timely subject, and we really appreciate your sharing that with us. We're going to stop the recording now.